In which war did you serve?
World War II,
In which branch of service?
Navy, U.S. Navy.
What was your highest rank?
Was radio operator second class.
In which general locations did you serve?
I served in the Pacific, 2 different occasions.
Were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor.
Where were you living at the time?
I lived in Hamilton, New Jersey, which is 30 miles from Philadelphia.
And do you recall the date you enlisted?
It was December 8th. Well, Pearl Harbor was December 7th, if I'm not mistaken.
Why did you join?
Well, I felt it was my duty.
Why did you pick the service that you joined?
Well, I felt that the Army was a little bit more difficult, and I would not be too happy with the Army. So I thought the Navy would be better.
Tell me about your first days in service.
Well, I was in I have to, my memory is picking things up. I was at the Great Lakes Training Center in Great Lakes, Illinois, just north of Chicago. And that's where they go to sort of start you off and train you. And from there, I went to radio operator school in Chicago at the University of Chicago. The Navy had a school set up. And I was there for several months. And finally passed the flying colors and was deemed ready to serve as a radio operator in the Navy.
How did it feel?
How did it feel?
Right.
It felt
So.
like I was doing what I had to do.
Can you tell us about your boot camp and training experiences?
Well, the boot camp was, as I said, in Great Lakes Training Center, I think it's called, in northern Illinois. And I didn't think it was very much fun. I didn't really like it a lot, but we got through it, and I had some good friends there who went through it with me.
Do you remember any instructors?
No.
How did it feel when you got through it?
Well, I was glad to be finished because I didn't like the way they treated you.
Okay. After boot camp, where did you go?
Then I, let's see, I ended up, I guess, in the Philly Navy Yard for a little bit, and then I was assigned to what they call a submarine chaser, and that was built in New Jersey and came up into the Philly Navy Yard, and that's where we boarded it and took it down to Miami for some training.
What were your first impressions when you arrived on the ship?
Well, it was a small ship, small wooden ship, a submarine chaser, they called them. You were able to fire some depth charges, and they had I think a 40 millimeter gun up in the bow, and that was it. And they also had what do you call it, the sonar equipment to try to locate submarines underwater.
And what was your assignment there?
I was a radio operator.
Then where did you go?
Well, we went to Miami, and then after some months there in training, we went to the Pacific through the Panama Canal. And we went to a lot of different islands in the Pacific. I can't remember them all. But a sub chaser could only, it didn't have its own water making, and it only had enough fuel for 5 days at a time. So we had to sail alongside of bigger ships that had their own water available. And we would pull up alongside them every few days to take on water and fuel. And I forget now it was a ship that we that had a lot of recruits on it, or people who were going out to the Pacific to fight.
Were you on a sub chaser for your whole time in service?
No, I was in it for about a year, and then we were in Guadalcanal. And that was after the worst of the fighting was over there. And then I got assigned to go back to the States to go into the V-12 program, which was to go to college.
And you went to college while you were in the service?
Yes.
And how long were you in that program?
Well, I was only in there for a few months at the engineering school in up in northern New Jersey. I forget the name of it now. And then it looked like the war might be over soon. It was getting into 44, and I didn't like. The colleges did not have their good professors or anything, so I thought that, and the GI Bill had been passed, so I thought that I would be able to go after the war. And I had worked for DuPont's before the war, and DuPont's had called back anybody who was in the States to work on making tetraethyl lead, which was absolutely needed for the Air Force. There were many planes built, but they couldn't fly because they didn't have gas. So I went to work for DuPont's, and that was supposed to be for 3 months, but it ended up being 6 months.
Were you on any other ship while you were in the service?
Yes. When I left DuPont's, I went back to Philly Navy Yard, and they assigned me to a ship, a cruiser called the Topeka. The USS Topeka was being built in Boston, and they assigned me to that, and that was in late 44, or early 45, and we started. And I remember when we were down in going through the Panama Canal, that we heard that Roosevelt had died. Franklin Roosevelt had died. So, and then we went on from there to Okinawa and joined the Third Fleet and went off the coast of Japan till the end of the war. And there were 1,000 planes a day bombing the coast of Japan with this Third Fleet. It was a huge naval fleet.
Did you see any combat?
Well, very little. We saw a few Jap planes, but none that really were. They had been bombing in the island where we picked up the Third Fleet, and but they were running out of planes. They had really destroyed quite a few of our ships.
And your assignment during that time was a radio man?
Yes, yes, radio man, second class.
Were there any casualties in your unit?
No.
All right. Did you have any casualties?
No.
Were you awarded any medals or citations?
Oh, I've gotten some medals, but I can't recall. I'll show you. But they keep falling off the place I put them.
How did you stay in touch with your family?
With just with letters. I was engaged when I left for that time in the Pacific, the last time. So I had wrote it every day to my future wife, and she would write to me every day. But you didn't get the letters till they came in, maybe 24 at a time or something like that.
Did you sustain any injuries when you were in the service?
No.
What was the food like?
Wasn't too bad, but it wasn't bad at all. I didn't have any problems with the food.
Did you feel any stress?
Not a lot, no.
Was there anything special you had for good luck? Did you have a rabbit's foot? Did you?
No, I'm not involved in that.
How did people entertain themselves?
Well, I'm trying to think of that now. We did have some musicians, and they played music occasionally. And I don't seem to recall what else we did.
Did you see any USO shows?
I'm trying to think of that. I don't remember seeing any, but that doesn't mean I didn't. I saw one or two when I was in the States.
Did you go on leave while you were in the service?
Yes, a few times.
Do you recall any particularly humorous events or unusual events?
I can't think of anything, no.
Okay. What did you think of your officers and fellow servicemen?
Well, I had some pretty good friends, and some of them were pretty rotten and mean. And some of the officers were pretty highfalutin. I was not too happy with some of them, but I couldn't do anything about it.
Did you keep a journal?
No, you weren't allowed to do that.
Where were you when your service ended?
I was, our ship
Okay.
came back to the States,
Okay, go on.
and I was in California, where they came back into Oregon, at Portland, Oregon. And I didn't fly, I took a train east, and I got married in November of 45. And then I had to go back, and the ship was in California by then, off of Long Beach, I think. And that's where I got discharged.
Okay. Tell me about the day you were discharged. You remember?
Well, I remember it was very anxious to get going back home. It was in California.
What was your homecoming like?
Well, it was good, and as I said, I had just gotten married a little before that, so I had to set up a place with my wife.
Did you go to work or go to school?
I did go to work, and but I had applied for going to school at Rensselaer Polytechnic on the way back to from Japan. Our ship, I was able to apply at 3 colleges: MIT, RPI, and the Carnegie Tech Institute, because I wanted to be an engineer. And I was accepted at MIT or RPI right away, so I ended up going there.
Did you go under the GI Bill?
Yes, of course.
Did you make any close friendships in the service?
In the service? Well, I did, but we've lost touch with each other. I don't even remember the names now.
What did you do after you got out of the service as a career?
I'm a metallurgical engineer, and so I worked for Westinghouse Company in Pittsburgh for 15 years. And I moved to work for Pfizer. They had a metals business, which wasn't the best business for the drug industry people, but that's when I ended up moving east and finally came to Connecticut.
How did your military service influence your thinking about the war or the military in general?
Well, I was certainly very happy to be out of the service. They asked me if I wanted to join the reserves, and I said absolutely not. I was very fortunate because a lot of people that did join the reserves got called back in the Korean War. So, but I thought that the service was certainly not the worst thing in the world. It's just that it took 4 years out of my life.
Did you join any veterans organizations?
I don't know. I don't remember joining any.
How did your service experience affect your life?
Well, I was, of course, somewhat older when I went to college, and so I don't know. I don't think it affected my life a lot, but it just took a few years out of it, if you will.
Is there anything that you'd like to add that has not been covered in this interview?
I can't think of anything right now, but I'm sure it'll come to me later.
I'd like to thank you for your service and also for taking time to be interviewed today.
You're very welcome.